everyone, and welcome to another Tempo Strategy Legends of Runeterra Meta Snapshot. The Spirit Blossom Festival is in full swing, and the Nightshade Dragonlings are in the air. Patch 1.7 was recently released, however it didn't bring with it any changes to cards. Just because there weren't any cards changed, however, that doesn't mean that the format hasn't seen any significant changes. More time since the Will of Ionia nerf has passed, meaning players have had more time to adjust to the change. Ultimately, decks that rely on expensive units can now more reliably get them into play without worrying about taking a major tempo loss. Today's meta report will be taking a look at all of the tier 1 decks of the format, as well as some of the top performing tier 2 decks you may find on the ladder. To get an idea of what the entire metagame looks like, head on over to tempostorm.com to see the full meta snapshot. Before we get into it, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and click that bell icon to stay up to date with more tempo strategy content. Now let's take a look at tier 1. Kicking things off in this meta snapshot is Endure Aggro. This is an archetype that is constantly finding its way into the top of the metagame and has once again shot up to the top, seemingly out of nowhere. What makes Endure Aggro so powerful is its multifaceted game plan. The deck can start games off blazing fast with Cursed Keeper alongside a Ravenous Butcher or Blighted Caretaker. In the mid-game, once its units become outclassed and irrelevant, Neverglade Collector allows the Endure player to transition into a chump blocking game plan while continuing to tax the enemy health total. If the opponent manages to stave off the early aggression that Endure Aggro can put out, then the namesake of the deck can come down to end the game. They Who Endure can easily become a 12-12 overwhelm or better, and when combined with Atrocity, can quickly close out the game. Currently, They Who Endure has incredible matchups against the large majority of the metagame. Most decks simply cannot keep up with both of the deck's game plans. Generally, if the deck can survive the early onslaught, then the defending player will fall to the They Who Endure. If the enemy deck does have answers to They Who Endure, it is unlikely the deck has enough tools with Endure's early game backed up by Neverglade Collector. Of all of the decks in tier 1 and 2, the only deck Endure struggles against is Casino, due to its ability to race and wipe a board of small units with Jinx rockets. Ashe Sejuani also has a reasonable matchup against Endure, since Reckoning can deal with Endure's small boards, while Frostbite can deal with They Who Endure itself. Following right behind is Turbo Deep. A new way to build sea monsters, Turbo Deep gets away from Shadow Isles in favor of Piltover and Zaun. This gives the archetype access to solid removal options in both Thermogenic Beam and Mystic Shot. It also gives the deck access to more cheap cycle in Rummage and Zaunite Urchin, so that it may go deep faster. Turbo Deep has winning matchups against the majority of the format, much like Aggro Endure, but it does possess different losing matchups. Swain Ezreal has solid tools to stall out Turbo Deep's board, while Aggro Endure is often able to beat down the Turbo Deep player early in the game. Turbo Deep also lacks answers to They Who Endure outside of Nautilus's Riptide, making the matchup that much harder to win. Resting in the middle of tier 1 is Frostbite Midrange. This deck is packed full of 5 power units, so it can capitalize on Trifarian Assessor to refill its hand. The deck aims to fill the board with beefy units that will quickly pressure the opponent, often forcing out bad blocks. Frostbite Midrange preys on decks that also want to fight for the board, but don't have the same bulk to match Frostbite Midranges, such as Sejuani MF or Scouts. Frostbite Midrange struggles to deal with Turbo Deep due to sea monsters being able to outlarge the Frostbite deck. Casino also has an excellent matchup into Frostbite Midrange, being able to apply quick pressure while having plenty of small units to chump block the threats out of Frostbite. At the lower half of tier 1, we have Ezreal Twisted Fate, a variant of Ezreal that is able to quickly beat its opponents down, then close the game out with Ezreal and a flurry of spells. While Ezreal is typically a combo control archetype, Ezreal Twisted Fate aims to be an aggressive deck that can fall back on a combo control plan depending on the context of its hand. Ezreal Twisted Fate does great into other Ezreal decks due to Riptide Rex being able to deal heavy amounts of damage directly to the enemy nexus. While Ezreal Twisted Fate has a wealth of removal and AoE effects, it has a surprisingly bad matchup into They Who Endure. As mentioned earlier, though the deck has the tools to deal with Endure's early board, the late game Endure itself will be large and nearly impossible for the Ezreal player to safely remove from the board. Closing off tier 1 is Swain TF, an archetype that is built on strong removal. While the deck aims to grind its opponent out of cards so that it can win through its value tools, the build does have a deceptive amount of burn damage and can quickly turn the corner after stabilizing. TF Swain tends to have fairly even matchups across the board, with some being slightly TF Swain favored or slightly favored to the enemy. TF Swain lacks matchups that are complete blowouts and is consistent against everything. That said, the deck does prefer to fight decks that want to play mid-sized units to the board, such as Frostbite Midrange and Sejuani Misfortune. Decks such as Turbo Deep and Endure Aggro can give it problems. Turbo Deep is able to build very large boards boards that TF Swain cannot easily remove, while it is near impossible for TF Swain to answer both They Who Endure alongside an Atrocity. Now that we have an understanding of what the top decks in the format look like, let's take a look at the top 3 decks of Tier 2. Be sure to go to tempostorm.com to see the entirety of the meta snapshot. Regarded as one of the most complex decks in Runeterra, Casino is a deck that is able to assemble explosive turns, quickly level its champions, draw through itself fast, then close the game out with burn spells. Casino has strong matchups against much of Tier 1, with its best matchups being Ashe Sejuani, Ezreal Twisted Fate, and the mighty Endure aggro. Casino struggles against on-the-board aggro decks such as Scouts and Sejuani MF, since these decks can outrace Casino as well as outvalue it on the board. An aggressive mid-range deck that gets onto the board early and makes blocking difficult thanks to its champion's abilities. Sejuani MF is often able to quickly pressure its opponents with low-cost units early, while threatening cards like Sejuani and Riptide Rex in the late game. Sejuani Misfortune does well into decks that lack tough blockers, such as Casino and Scouts. These decks will be forced to take blocks to stay alive, but Misfortune will pick off the blockers before they can retaliate. Sejuani MF has problems with Swain decks. These decks are often able to stave off Sejuani MF's early aggression so that a Swain Leviathan lock can grind them out of the game. The final deck we'll be looking at today, Thresh Lux, is a mid-range deck with strong tools to control the board and keep itself healthy. The deck plays Radiant Guardian, which happens to be well positioned in the current format, being able to block most units you will see played and survive so that it may heal you further. Thresh Lux does incredibly well into Ezreal Twisted Fate due to Radiant Guardian. The deck simply lacks good answers to the card outside of Thermogenic Beam and can easily be put into positions where Thermo Beam is too awkward to cast. Decks that line up well against Thresh Lux are ones that can assemble massive units that the deck simply cannot answer, such as Sea Monsters and They Who Endure. The Legends of Runeterra metagame is ever evolving, even when there are no balance changes to force player innovation. The new Runeterra expansion is only a couple of weeks away and will soon shake things up in a big way. For the weeks to come, the format is likely to continue to shift, but it seems like most of the best decks have found their positions in the metagame and do not seem to want to give them up. If you liked the video and enjoy learning more about the ever-changing Legends of Runeterra metagame, be sure to look at the entire meta report over at tempostorm.com. And once again, if you haven't already, we would really appreciate it if you would like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date with more tempo strategy content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.